Well, thank you so much for choosing to spend your valuable time with us here today at the Art of Feminine Negotiation. And it is definitely going to be worth your while. We are chatting today with Philip Blackett about negotiating disagreements without disrespect. Such an important subject these days in particular. So, welcome, Philip. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I'm happy to be a part of your show here.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a great conversation. And for those of you who don't know Philip, he is a best-selling author. He's a consultant, a speaker, an entrepreneur. Got a really interesting background. He's got a master's of divinity. He's got an MBA from Harvard Business School. He's got a bachelor's degree in poli-sci and economics. So he comes to us with lots of chops to give us some really great insights. Now, you've had, as I say, a really interesting and varied background, Philip. So tell us maybe how and why you came to write your most recent book. I see you've got a slew of them, but Disagree Without Disrespect is the one that had obviously caught my attention given my subject matter. So tell us a bit about how you came there.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Cindy. And the thing about it, most people don't know about me is that, yes, I did go to Harvard Business School, but if you were to ask me what was my favorite class while in business school, it actually wasn't at the business school. It
Huh.
was at Harvard Law School, and it was on negotiation.
Oh, wow. Oh, funny. Okay.
So how it dovetails into the book is basically it comes from the fact that, I was born and raised from a single parent family back in Memphis, Tennessee. My mom, she's into law. She went to law school. She was a corporate lawyer, later a
Wow.
judge, criminal court judge, and that sort. Very quickly, I could say, she's very opinionated and she knows her way around an argument.
Yeah.
So, in addition to her being my mom, she does this for a living.
Yeah.
So, best good luck to me if there's any disagreements that we have that she has a clear leg up in sort of years and experience and that sort with this little pipsqueak of a kid trying to get his way around, not getting detention or not, being able to take the car out and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The Friday night. So basically, she is a significant inspiration behind the book. And the reason why I say that, Cindy, is because even in my intro, I mentioned the moment that it really hit true for me. Growing up, my mom and I, we don't see eye to eye on everything, but we still love each other.
Yeah.
And one of the things I always will remember that she taught me was that she basically said, "Look, Philip, we're not always going to agree on everything. That's a given. But just because I disagree with you on something, that does not mean that I don't love you."
Mhm. Nice.
And so the book actually came from a disagreement in the family, but she was trying to mediate it, and I saw otherwise. So basically, 4th of July weekend, 2023, my sister had come to visit my family. My mom was here as well. We had a conversation. A topic du jour came up from my sister. We were about to engage in it because there was clearly a difference of opinion on it.
Yeah.
And my mom steps in basically and says, "Nope, we're not going to talk about it." I was like, "What's going on?" She said, "Nope, I can already sense it. You have a certain view on this. She has a certain view on this. I don't want to risk any sort of family harmony over 4th of July and having fireworks before the actual fireworks." And honestly, Cindy, I felt at a loss of words,
Yeah.
ironically enough,
Yeah.
because what came off in my eyes was we've come into a day now that it's much better to prevent discussion of different viewpoints for the sake of preserving harmony
Yeah.
or de-risking any sort of arguments or whatever can transpire because people are different from how I grew up.
Yeah.
You have a disagreement about something, you might get upset, but you'll cool over.
Yeah.
Nowadays, people can take matters into their own hands and be violent. And so basically what came out of that, Cindy, was like, okay, I want to be able to talk about different things with my sister and other people. We just got to figure out how to get back to the rules of engagement that we frankly lost,
Yeah.
which that was a possibility to do it. Because here was the other thing that was inspiring to me. Growing up, like I said, my mom in the law, there are many times I saw in the courtroom people from one side, another attorney on the other side,
Yeah.
differing beliefs on this case, arguing very passionately. But the weird part about it was when they finished the debate, or the case, they actually like shook hands and had dinner together.
Yeah.
They said, "Hey, let's grab a drink," or
Yeah.
"Hey, is your daughter's soccer game this Saturday? Where is it
Yeah.
at? Okay, I'll be there." And
Yeah.
you're like, "But y'all were just going at each other's necks on this one."
Yeah.
And what I kept seeing, whether it was in law or negotiations or politics, is just like there was a stage and an age where people could say, "Yeah, we debate on the issues at hand, and we still can be friends with the people we disagree with."
Yeah.
And I was like, this is where we need to get back to. And
Yeah.
that's why I
Well,
wrote the book.
I am so glad you wrote the book. I think it is so necessary these days. And I was laughing so hard at the beginning because as 30 plus years as a lawyer myself, I can't tell you how many times my family accused, my husband and the kids like, oh, mom, it's not fair. I can't win an argument with you. I blah, blah, blah. So I totally struck a chord. And it particularly always stuck in my craw because growing up, I grew up in a low rental, rent controlled complex in sort of a tough neighborhood. And mostly just working class blue collar people. But my dad always instilled us everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. So it really resonates with me when you talk about that respect piece, because you're right. Now, I understand your mom's motivation, but I think it's one of the big worries that we're facing now is nobody taught. There's no room for dialogue anymore. So let's start by spending a moment talking about respect, because I know that's sort of at the foundation of what you do in your book. So tell our listeners, what does that look like for you? How can we get more intentional about bringing respect into our conversations and negotiations?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think one of the things we have to think about, I used to do debates in high school and that sort of thing, and I'm a pretty competitive person,
Yeah.
right? And so one of the things when we think about respect is ultimately what is more important of what we're engaging in at this particular time?
Yeah.
Is it about us being right or winning the argument? Or is it more important for us to learn about each other's perspectives and about preserving or even strengthening the relationship?
Yeah. I
So
love that.
oftentimes when we think about respect, it's like, okay, not just, no name calling, no cursing people out, and that sort of thing. That's a part of it. There's another part where it's just like, okay, people's ideas, you don't know how tied they are to the idea
Yeah.
at hand. They may be so intertwined that that becomes a part of their identity.
Yeah.
And so for you to disagree with that idea, that person could take it as a personal slight
Yeah.
against them, saying, I don't agree with who you are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's what makes it even all the more careful because that lawyer example I mentioned earlier, they knew this is not who I am. This is just my job. This is
Yeah.
we're debating the merits of this case or this negotiation. But we're in a place now where respect is more so saying, hey, I see you. I understand you're passionate about this issue. I may feel different about it. And I want to have a conversation to better understand where you're coming
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
And whether we agree or we disagree, you're still going to hold value to me
Yeah.
after we talk about
Yeah.
this.
So beautiful and so important. And interestingly, like when you're using the legal example, I got to tell you, like over my 30 years, 30 plus, frankly, I saw such a shift in our legal system and the players because there used to always be that, yes, we would advocate vociferously for our client, but then there was always that respect piece. And it is a different breed now, right? And part of it, I think our legal system is designed, even if you think of the language, right? It's opposing counsel, it's the other side, it's about winning a case. Even all of our language suggests that it has to be this inherent conflict. And so often I see people miss a great opportunity that would better serve both sides, and yet they miss it because they're so attached. Now, you talked about identity, and I love that. That really strikes a chord with me because I think more and more in our society, their political views are becoming their identity, and it's getting more and more challenging. So I'm a big believer in the power of empathy in negotiations, and I'd love your thoughts on that. When we show up truly putting ourselves in the shoes of the other party and seeking to understand, what their needs are over our own as at the front end. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I learned is the fact that everyone is going through some sort of struggle
Yeah.
at any particular time. And if somebody's particularly passionate about a particular issue opposed to what you think, it probably is safe to say it's not personal to you.
Yeah.
It's just there's a story behind the position.
Yeah.
Why does that person feel that way? What was it about, their life that they were impacted by this topic at hand? One of the biggest misconceptions that people have about this book is they think it's purely a political book. And it's anything different than that. Because at the core of it, Cindy, is we are going to come across people that disagree on something.
Yeah.
I've been married 8 years. My wife and I, we don't agree on everything.
Yeah.
And we're
Shocking.
still married. Shockingly, right? I have kids. We don't
Yeah.
agree on everything.
Yeah.
And I would venture to say anybody, you or your listeners, you probably don't have anybody that you agree on with everything.
Yeah, impossible. Well, and I'm
So
glad
this,
you mentioned that, Philip, because and I would just wanted, before we move on from that, when you said everybody says about your book, they assume automatically it's about politics. And it's one of the problems I have with, my program about the art of feminine negotiation. As soon as people hear the word negotiation, their mind goes only in one direction. And I believe that all of life is a negotiation. So I'd love, how and where can we apply your models? I'd love you to talk about, so our listeners know that your book is valuable, whether with their intimate partner, with their kids, and service providers, and business deals. What do you have to say about that?
yeah, so that's why the subtitle of the book is so important. It's disagree without disrespect, but the subtitle is how to respectfully debate with those who think, believe, and vote differently from you.
Yeah.
So if we take time to just think of those three words, think,
Yeah.
believe, and vote differently, one of them, yeah, you could probably say, yeah, that's definitely sounds political.
Yeah.
What about believe? Belief could be something
Yeah.
that some people could think is more related to religion. Belief could be more so as far as, okay, Cindy has a way of parenting that might have been, carried over from her parents.
Yeah.
And that is a belief as far as this is how we raise our kids.
Absolutely.
This is what I believe we should do. And I understand down the street, you guys might do something different. That's a different belief.
Yeah.
Think is more so is like bring it back to the negotiation table. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that you should pay X for this asset. Okay. I think you should pay Y for this asset.
Yeah.
Okay, X and Y are different numbers. We're thinking differently here. So the thought is that what we're basically dealing with, Cindy, is interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
We're dealing with how do we engage with other human beings, whether it's dealing with politics, if we're in the workplace, you're thinking one strategy is different than the other,
Yeah.
negotiation table, you're talking about parenting,
Yeah.
relationships. What are you going to have for dinner today?
Yeah. What movie are we going to?
What movie are you going to watch, right?
Yeah.
It's just like there's so many different points of potential contention and
Yeah.
confrontation that we see a lot of relationships break up over that type of disagreement because we are not skilled so much on how to communicate our different viewpoints
Yeah.
and how do we resolve the conflicts because it is possible you can think differently and still come to some solution
Yeah.
to keep you all together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you used, I'm really glad you used that XY example as well, because I think so often, and I've certainly seen it over my career and in my programming around negotiation, somebody thinks they want X, the other person thinks they want Y, and they become so attached to that that they don't see that there's a whole host of other creative solutions that are better than X and Y combined. And you used the word attached earlier. And, I often find we're so attached to the outcome that we think we want that we're not open to even better options that might be on the table. So I know you speak a lot to the power of sort of changing our mind and reframing how we look at that. I'd love if you could speak to that.
And that's a big reason why I loved negotiation when I learned because I came in there learning, okay, you got to have this point A and this person is going to have point B. But the mind blowing revelation for me was, does that necessarily have to be a either or?
Yes.
What if we have just a blank sheet of paper instead of me sitting across from you, I'm sitting next to you and say,
Yeah.
hey, what's important to you, Cindy, that you want to get out of this?
Yeah.
And then I share with you what's important for me that I want to get out of this. And we say, is there a way that we can get as much of what each one of us wants that
Yeah.
might be a third alternative?
Yeah.
If we just give ourselves a sense of like, hey, let's take the limits off and explore what we can have. Well, you can't have that unless you have a certain type of approach that says, hey, I'm not trying to muscle my way to win on this one and
Yeah.
prove I'm superior to my opponent. It's more so saying, hey, how do we work together to get more of what we want, where we actually open the door for future negotiations?
Yes.
Because oftentimes you might fight a certain way and you say, hey, I don't want to deal with Philip anymore. He was rude. He was this. He was that. Yes, he got what he wanted, but I never want to deal with him ever again.
Yeah.
Well, you might have won the argument, but you lost the war. You
Absolutely.
like you're not it's purely a one-time transaction versus the people that are in this for a career.
Yeah.
They find ways to say, hey, I'll give you 51% and I'll take 49% because what I know is that you'll likely come to the door again and we'll be able to do another similar negotiation or deal in the future. And
Yeah.
that's the type of approach we should
Yeah.
have.
Oh, so important. And it's interesting to me when you say that one-time transaction, because I'd go even a step for even on those so-called one-time transactions, there is rarely such a thing. The world is a strange place. And, but with the 6 points of connection, it is a very small world. And sometimes you think you're having a one-time transaction and you don't show up as the best version of yourself. And then lo and behold, down the road, that person is in another position, or you end up having to meet them in another capacity. It's the parent of one of the kids in your kid's soccer team, or what there's a whole, or even your reputation. They talk to somebody who talks to somebody. So, I mean, showing up with curiosity and compassion and creativity, so important. So why don't we let you brag a bit about your 5-step disagree without disrespect framework? What can you share with us about that?
Yeah, so we'll take it one step at a time and you'll probably find out too real quickly. We've actually touched on a couple of them at least.
I'm not
So the,
surprised.
so the first one is being able to separate the idea or belief from the identity of the believer.
Yeah.
Right? So we talked about that where it's like oftentimes, depending on who you're talking to, they may be so intertwined that to criticize the idea comes off as criticizing the person or who that
Yeah.
person is.
Yes.
Right. So trying to separate that and make it clear, we're just talking about the idea or belief at hand that could be helpful where people aren't taking it personal.
Yeah.
Second one, related to it, it's perfectly fine to disagree with the idea. And you can still love the believer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's disconnecting that notion that a lot of people have, where it's like to love me means to agree with me.
Yeah. Yes.
Your your love is contingent on whether or not you allow me to go out on Friday night,
Yeah.
mom. And if you don't do that, you don't love me.
Yeah.
No, I can still love you and disagree with what you're saying. So being able to say, hey, I may disagree with the idea, but I still respect and love you. That's key.
Yes.
Number three, this is something that I'm sure you're very well versed on. Debate the issue on its merits, please.
Yeah.
Like, I get
Yeah.
it. We feel particularly emotional or passionate about it,
Yeah.
but I like to see more logic, more
Yeah.
data, more merit, no name calling,
Yes.
no manipulation, no trying to grandstand and make you feel bad and that sort of shaming.
Yeah.
Let's focus on just may the best argument win.
Yeah.
May the best presentation win, just on its merits. Let's have a meritocracy here.
Yeah.
Okay. Meritocracy is not a bad word.
Yeah.
Okay. That's actually a really good word. Number four, be a good sportsmanship. Good
Yeah.
sportsmanship, something we learned in sports. Guess what happens? When your soccer team plays the other soccer team, what happens at the end of the game? You line up, you come to each other. What do? Good game, 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 good game. Good game, good game, good game, good game. You're tired of it by the third handshake, right? Whether you win or lose, whether you go to that person's side or that person comes to your side, you're still on separate ends. You
Yeah.
both disagree still, or in this name of negotiation, maybe there's a third alternative that comes
Yeah.
out just from your own creativity and your
Yeah.
openness.
Yeah.
In any case, be a good sport about it.
Yeah.
Don't be a sore winner. Don't be a sore loser,
Yeah.
because that may predict whether you're going to engage with this again. Which gets to my final point: respect and love the person you just had a debate with, regardless of the outcome,
Yeah.
and keep the door open to learn more. So
Yeah.
part of the win is not so much winning the argument. Part of the win might be that that person trusted you enough to be vulnerable, to
Yes.
share about himself or herself, to learn more about why she's thinking this way. Why does she believe this? And be able to say, hey, I appreciate us talking about this. I'd love to learn more. Maybe we can get some coffee and talk a little bit more. Tell me the story about, what happened in your life as far as what led you to believe this way.
Yeah.
Or maybe we can have another discussion about this, and I bring my partner from work because she may have a different perspective that
Yeah.
might be helpful for the conversation.
Yeah.
So keeping the door open allows people to say, hey, I may disagree with Philip, but you know what? He's not a jerk.
Yeah.
I may disagree with Philip, but you know what? He allowed me to talk.
Yes.
He didn't ram things down my throat. He
Yeah.
listened to me, and he's open to further learning where I'm coming from. Because
Yeah.
honestly, that I think is one of the hidden elements with negotiation. It's just the element of being open
Yeah.
and considerate and
Yeah.
listening. Win or lose,
Yeah.
people are going to take away from that and say, hey, you're different from other people. And oftentimes, it's a good way to influence people.
Yeah.
Even if
Exactly.
you're not trying to win or lose an argument,
Yeah.
it's a good sense to influence them to say, you know what? I might be more open to everyone else's are jerks, but
Yeah.
that Philip, I might be more open to learning more about him too.
Oh, it's such a great framework. And I mean, so simple in some ways, and yet we seem to have moved so far away from some of those basic principles. And at its core, we all just want to be seen and heard and know that we matter in the world. So just some of those simple steps that you talked about are so important. And I love when you, and that last point, when you were sort of hinting as well about be really clear about the outcome you want. Because sometimes arguing over that thing that you think that you want, we get so attached to that, but it actually is less important than maybe the relationship outcome, or as you pointed out, Philip, the trust building. And it strikes me, I remember when the kids were young and we weren't allowing them to have cell phones. It was like, but everybody has a cell phone. All our friends have a cell phone. It's like, you're not having a cell phone until this point. And then one of my boys, who was not the oldest, right? So my daughter had gone through and she just sucked it up. And he got really creative. He was dyslexic, so it was a challenge for him. And he wrote me this long letter that was so adorable and so creative. And I went to my husband. I'm like, you know what? We got to give them the cell phone. This isn't about whether we can win the argument. This isn't about whether we hold the power. The outcome of his increased confidence and appreciation for the importance of building a persuasive argument is worth way more than winning this particular argument. So I love the point you've made. And I just wanted to circle back because, we've talked a bit about that. Well, I guess this increased polarization that we're seeing in today's world, where
Mhm.
people aren't listening to each other, and there is the name calling, and their identities are being attached, on everything from COVID to politics, where there didn't even seem to be the space allowed for meaningful dialogue to actually come to best solutions. So
Mhm.
I'd love your thoughts, and I think you've really touched on a lot of it, but just to really put a pin in that for our listeners, how do we redress that problem that people just simply aren't listening or opening the space for dialogue?
Yeah, so I think part of that, what goes with that is, there's a lot of ego in the
Yes.
conversation,
Yeah.
right? I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say on that because, you know, once again, when you're so tied to how you believe and what you're thinking, you're not even open to what other people are
Yeah.
saying. You're having that confirmation bias that you're only listening to things that validate or
Yeah.
support what you're thinking. So you're getting more and more stronger in your way of thinking, but less and less exposed to
Yeah.
what other people are thinking. And any good lawyer or negotiator worth his or her weight should know
Yeah.
it's not so much how well you know your argument, it's how well you know the other person's argument
Yeah.
to be able to advocate for them and understand where are the points where you can connect, where are the points where you can disagree.
Yeah.
But I think part of it here is whether you say it's media, whether you say it's just like how politics really is, I wonder sometimes as far as we live in a lens where it's like, okay, we're in the here and now today, and we have social media.
Yeah.
But was our times really that polarized compared to before social media?
Hmm.
Because here's the thing, there are still people that disagreed in 1990s,
Yeah.
1960s, and before, but you also didn't have a means where you are constantly
Yeah.
reminded
Yeah.
of things that you disagree with or you agree with. And the repetition of it can happen where you have to be careful being on a Facebook, a Twitter, or Instagram, and the people you follow, it's part of their business to
Yeah.
stir the pot. Like that is like
Yeah.
that is they have a vested interest to keep you engaged. And if
Yeah.
they can do that through fear, through
Yeah.
anger, or whatever the case may be, they'll keep putting that content out every day. And you feel like, man, all these bad things are happening, all these bad people,
Yeah.
I can't stand them. And all of a sudden somebody says, what do you want for dinner? Don't ask me what I want for dinner. I just ask you, you want sweet potato, like potatoes and steak. I'll leave you alone. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is people are being conditioned to think a certain way without an alternative.
Yeah.
And that's what for me was like where I felt like the timing for the book was really helpful because
Yeah.
when you don't have an alternative and you keep saying something loud and repetitive and that sort, people think that that's just the way it is. And without an alternative, you have more people thinking, okay, this is just how we're supposed to be. This is how we should conduct business.
Yeah.
This is how we should talk to our
Yeah.
parents, how we should talk to our friends and our teachers.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned confirmation bias. I think people keep forgetting or underestimating the power. I thought the documentary Social Dilemma was great for that, showing how we get fed information on our social media that supports the views that we already have, which you mentioned, and such a dangerous practice to fall into, and all the more reason why it's so important. And for listeners, really invite you to get out there and intentionally have discussions with people who have different views than you. Come with an absolute open, curious mindset to start that dialogue. I think it's important. Now, you mentioned big egos, Philip, and I really want to touch on that because I think so much, I often talk about the importance of surrendering ego when you're coming into these discussions, surrender your attachment to your ID being the only one. What tips do you have on how to better manage maybe big egos and strong personalities to find more creative solutions and get those better outcomes?
Yeah, so I think for me, I think about it like, look, it's much easier to work on yourself before you work on somebody else,
Yeah.
right? So it's like address the log in your eye before you address the speck in somebody else's, right? They say. And so the thought that comes to my mind is when you prepare yourself where your guard is down and you're looking to be of service to somebody else and to collaborate with somebody else when you're talking to them. And understand, I'm not a mind reader, Cindy. I don't know exactly what's going on in your
Yeah.
head by the time we get in this issue. That's what makes it a wild card.
Yeah.
That's what would make any negotiation kind of fun because you don't know exactly what
Yeah.
that person's going to bring. But at the end of the day, it comes off of what is your intent?
Yeah.
Because what often comes off is when you have a debate or an argument, ego plays a role where it's like, I have to win
Yeah.
because I don't want to be seen as someone who lost to this person.
Yeah.
And my ego is so, dare I say, fragile
Yeah.
that I can't take the possibility that somebody else may have a better line of thinking than I do.
Yeah.
And so what goes on with that is we have to work on ourselves to think of that and say, hey, what is the intent here?
Yeah.
Is it truly just about winning? Is it about us understanding?
Yeah.
Is it about us building a relationship? It could be a multiple things.
Yeah.
But what I do know is if you have two strong-headed people coming into a room,
Yeah.
you're probably not going to get much done.
Yeah.
So when you let your guard down and say, hey, I hear you. Let me know what is important to you and let's see how we can make this work.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it'll catch people off guard by surprise and say, oh, you don't have your boxing gloves up?
Yeah.
What, hold up, Cindy, you're not gonna. tell me every name of the book that I am outside of my first name out
Yeah.
of this already? Okay, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Why don't we sit down then?
Yeah.
What? Okay, well, and just by that, just taking things a notch, like deleveraging the
Yeah.
situation, like walking that person off a cliff and just say,
Yeah.
hey, listen, it's okay.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes that surprise is welcoming the people,
Yeah.
and that will get people to think like, okay, maybe I could take my guard down too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because oftentimes we put on a facade or a mask, or we amp ourselves up with our favorite workout music before a negotiation. And you're so wound up to the point that when
Yeah.
someone touches you, you just burst.
Oh, I
As
think you have
opposed,
hit on such a key point there. And again, I want to really put a pin in that for our listeners. We are so conditioned to go into negotiations and believe that the best negotiators are people who hold their cards really close to their chest. And I love what you just said, Phil. I think in my experience, when you show up with vulnerability, it can be a game changer. And I confess, I was known as the Barracuda early in my career because I looked around, I'm like fresh faced 20 something out of law school. And I'm like, oh my God, nobody's going to take me seriously. I need to get scrappier. And it wasn't until, much later in my career when I had my epiphany about this approach and showed up with that kind of vulnerability. And the reaction was exactly what you just described, Philip. You could see them kind of go, whoa, okay, Cindy, you're not biting my head off. You're not going for the juggler here. And it just opened their, and then it triggered that reciprocity where they were more vulnerable. And suddenly we found all of these creative options. And I think so much of that comes down to preparing. One of my models, I call it the no fear model. As you're preparing for a negotiation, think, what are the fears I bring to the table? What are the fears they're going to bring to the table? How does ego show up for me? And how can I minimize that? FEAR. And what am
mhm.
I attached to? What are they likely to be attached to? And how can we get off of that? Our reactivity. What are the things that trigger my reactivity? And what are things that are likely to trigger them to be reactive? And how can I avoid it? So I'd love your thoughts on what do you see as some of the most important elements of preparation to show up as a better version in your negotiations?
Yeah, so I think when you're trying to learn as much as you can about the person or the issue at hand, that definitely helps. I remember even when I was in negotiation class, it's just like you had your prompt as far as like what your case is from
Yeah,
your perspective, and then a certain things about the other person. But I think that's where curiosity plays a role, because there's only so much you can prepare,
yeah,
because I'm not a mind reader.
yeah,
I haven't lived with you forever to know exactly what are your pain points, what are your triggers, what are the things you want out of life. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to have a discovery.
yeah, yeah,
Let's have a point where it's like, okay, you only prepare so much. You know what you're looking for. You know what the other person's looking for to some degree.
yeah,
You try to find that, possible common ground or zone of potential of agreement. You have your sense of what's your best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
yeah,
Okay, now that that's there, now let's have some fun.
yeah,
We're going to come to the table and I'm going to ask you questions, and we're just going to have a dialogue to kind of better
yeah,
understand, because maybe there's some things that I don't know already
yeah,
that just comes out this, oh, I didn't know that was important to you.
yes,
Well, what if we do this? And now you take your plan and you start
yeah,
altering it, changing it up. You might cut a little thing. Oh, well, I guess we don't need to worry about this. We'll
yeah,
talk about this. But it's more so like there's a preparation for you to innovate
yeah.
and be creative and collaborate when it comes time to engage with that collaborator versus that opponent.
I love that. Preparation to innovate. That is a great, you should trademark that. That is a great catchphrase. We get t-shirts made up with that. And you're so right. That really resonated with me because I love that exercise, the wiggy wiggy fruit negotiation exercise. I've seen it with different names, but basically, and I've done this simulation when I'm teaching negotiation classes with like full-time negotiators for really high profile trade unions. And invariably they miss it, right? So one side, exactly what you said, they get their statement about what they want and need with just a little bit about the other side, and then vice versa. And it turns out one goes in and, if they had started asking each other questions and been more curious and more receptive, they would have realized that one of them needs the seeds, the other one needs the juice. They can both get what they want out of the negotiation, and yet they battle. Even though one of them needs it to cure cancer, the other one is like saving children in, third world countries. So both really high stakes, and yet they negotiate the other person out of it when they both could have achieved their outcomes. So it's so great. Now, what do you see as the key reasons that negotiations fail? I mean, we probably touched on some of it, I think, but
So yeah, I think a big one is ego.
yeah,
I think a big one is closed-mindedness in
yeah.
terms of not wanting to actively listen to the other person. You're already thinking your rebuttal beforehand, and oftentimes you can't fool people. Some people don't have a poker face. I know I don't. So if I'm negotiating with you and I'm doing one of those, as you're talking, you're probably saying to yourself, I think he's not listening to
Yeah.
me. And so I think ego, closed-mindedness, I think wrong motive or intent
Mm,
play a role here too,
yeah,
because it's just one of those things where it's just like there's so much into this that you're so short-term minded
yeah,
that oftentimes people can get a sense of that. Like people are trying to find a like people are trying to find a reason to say no. Like
yeah,
negotiation is also like sales.
yeah,
People are trying to find a reason to say no to you.
yeah.
Don't give them another reason. Give them reasons to say yes,
Yeah.
right? And so I think part of that is just like how you approach it. If you're very short-term minded and it comes apparent to that person, you're now treading water or digging yourself out of a
Yeah.
ditch at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny when you said that wrong motive. I think that's great because integrity is such an important piece of it. And when people talk about integrity, they always think of just the, showing up from a place of moral righteousness, which absolutely, that's an element. But I also love the original Latin, like integrity from the word integer, about being whole.
Oh,
We show up taking positions that are inconsistent with our own values. Things go sideways. They're going to go off the rails. So
mhm.
really, really beautiful insight there. And this has been fabulous. I can't believe how many great insights that we've had here and how quickly our time has gone. I normally like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life, Philip? And it doesn't have to be about negotiation. It can be anything that's been an aha moment for you where you show up differently or think differently.
So I think it's a play off of the saying everything is negotiable, where it's just like I think that was the biggest takeaway I got from negotiation class. It's just the thought of what you see it to be can be different from what someone else can
Yeah.
be like.
Yeah.
But even more so, it's like when you bring the two people together, there might be a whole nother world between you that you
Oh,
don't know of
yeah.
until you actually like open yourself up to think beyond the box.
Oh, that is so nice. So important, right? Imagine a world where we all did that rather than being so entrenched in thinking that our views are just so obvious. Of course, everybody must hold this view. It's so obvious, right? That's
Yep.
beautiful. And I want to circle back to something you said earlier that I thought was really powerful. And for our listeners, I can't remember what question it was in response to, but you'd said about everybody is going through something in their life. And I think we forget that so often. And I love that. I don't know if you know our Amanda Marshall song that was out there, really popular. I'm dating myself again here, but that taxi driver may have a PhD and she goes through these scenarios in the chorus. And we make assumptions about people that may or may not be accurate. And we have no idea where they're coming from on any given moment. So again, showing up with that empathy and understanding and recognizing that everything's negotiable. I think that's beautiful. So where can
Absolutely.
where can people learn more about you, Philip?
Yeah, so they can definitely find my book on Amazon. Just look for Disagree Without Disrespect. You can look up, use my name, Philip Blackett, or go to my website, philipblackett.com.
Beautiful. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. Philip, I can't believe how much incredible gems that you have dropped on this episode. So much value you've added. So thank you so much for joining and sharing this really important message always, but now in particular. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much, Cindy, for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I love it. We'll have to get you back for sure, and then do the next advanced level discussion or something, because that there's lots more gold to mine there. I could tell,
I'm
and so
definitely up for it.
I would love that. And for our listeners, you cannot say you did not get great value from this episode. If you feel like you didn't, then go back and listen again, because there were lots of really quite brilliant, life changing, not to be overly dramatic, but I believe life changing insights that you could take away from this episode. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and please give the gift of sharing. Share this episode with other people in your life. These days, especially when we're seeing such polarization, what a gift you're giving to share this message with other people so they can maybe show up a little differently, think a little differently about their interactions, and we can all start being a little more respectful even when we disagree, especially when we disagree. And that is a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and find ways that you can practice on purpose and find a better way to practice law so that you can rekindle your passion and make a difference in this world, negotiating your best life on your terms. Until next time, take care.